Hey, welcome everybody. I've got noon on the East Coast and 1000 here in Arizona where I am today. So thanks to everybody for joining us. While we're getting started, just drop in the chat where you're dialing in from. I know we had several people with us today who were with us last time, but it's always interesting to see where people are coming from. While you're doing that, quick introduction and let you know what we're going to do today. So this is a 6-part webinar series on how to pitch. And the goal is to teach people who are coming to these events the different steps around desirability, feasibility, and viability. So let me distinguish that from the anti-goal, which is I'm not going to teach you how to stand up straight and not say and not write all your words on your slides. That's not what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do is convey what entrepreneurs and innovators learn through repetition. And the reason is the way that you get good at this as an entrepreneur is you do it about 100 times because you get told no 99 times. And then you find that one where someone says yes. If you work at the Department of Defense, there's a challenge with that. See, when you go to your boss and you say, I've got this great idea and I want to try and put it up higher, and they say no, when you go to someone else, we call that insubordination. Right? So you don't get the same opportunity to learn that everyone else does. So we got to take a look at how do we do things differently. That's the other thing I want to convey to you is that this series is focused on folks who work within the government. There are different skill sets you'll use and different things to focus on if you're working in the civilian world. For example, if you've ever seen Mark Cuban on Shark Tank, he will tell you that he doesn't care about your comps, what other companies are doing. What he cares about is what's your cash flow, what's your gross margin, because that means whether or not you've got the money to continue running your business. That's not what we do in the Department of Defense. It's not what we do in the public sector. So there are some things we need to do differently. I want to dig down to the next layer and help everyone understand what those fundamental skills are that apply in both spaces, and then give you some actual, real, tangible things that you can use and try and move forward with. And so that's what we're trying to do today. Today is about research. Market research is a critical aspect of how any small business is going to run and succeed. And you got to be able to do the same thing in DoD. Let me see. There we go. I've jumped forward a little bit. So last time we talked about the problem, and this is the most important thing. You've got 6 seconds to get someone's attention, and you don't get their attention with your solution. You get their attention with the problem. That person you're talking to, whether it is the commanding general of CENTCOM or the commanding general of 18th Airborne Corps or the commanding general of Air Combat Command, you have to help them understand the problem you're trying to solve. That's what they have to get bought into immediately. If they're not bought into the problem, your solution is irrelevant. So that's what I want you to learn to focus on in the last webinar we did. And what I really talked about was you convey that through stories and facts. You don't learn any of those things sitting at your table. So one of the people that I learned a lot from was Steve Blank. And one of the first, if Steve only had one thing to tell you, he'd stomp his foot and say, get the hell out of the building. Because there are no answers in the building. The problem doesn't exist in the C-suite. The problem exists out where the problem is manifesting, and that's where the human beings are. So the point I want to convey through each of these 6 activities is that the 15 minutes we spend together here while I'm talking and you're listening, and then the 15 minutes we spend together while you're talking and I'm listening, aren't going to allow you to get where you need to be able to be to create a pitch. What I'm trying to do is give you the right questions, some of the right skills to go out and gather the facts and evidence you need to create that pitch. So that's what the second part is about. The first part was about making sure you know how to go out and ask who has the problem and what the right problem is. And then this part is about how do you do research to get at that problem? Because if you were the boss and someone came to you and said, boss, here's the problem, and you believed them, you bought in, one of the early questions you'd ask is, who else is working on this? And that's what I want you to be able to learn how to get after today. This is a translation that you do have in the civilian world. Who are your competitors? Who else is working in this space? What's your niche? You need to be able to understand who else is working in this area. And if not, why not? Because that's my next question. Boss, no one's working on this. Well, why? Have you somehow uncovered this unique problem that no one else realizes? You've got to be able to answer those questions. So This first class that we went through, the second class that we're going through, this is all about the first 6 to 30 seconds that you're going to spend in front of somebody. Your total pitch shouldn't be more than 7 or 8 minutes and about 10 slides. After that, you're just either reiterating things or getting into the weeds. This first part is what's most important. So let's talk about it for a second when we talk about research. This is one of my favorite quotes, but it is critical that you accept up front maybe you don't have the right problem. The key to innovation is not wasting time on things that don't need to be done. It's not about a magic skill where somehow you can find the exquisite solution to every single problem. It's that sometimes what you think is a problem isn't really a problem. We talked about, again, this last time, when you think you've got a problem and you're going to talk to the people who you believe live that problem, and you ask them, how did you solve it last time? And they say, nah, we just sucked it up. It's not a problem. It's an inconvenience, right? When they say we have to go through these massive challenges, spend a bunch of time and money to get to the other side of this, and we could really be much more efficient if we had a way to solve it quicker. Now you got a problem, right? Or this routinely causes mission failure. That's a real problem that you got to get after. So accept this premise at the beginning. Do you really have a problem? And the chances are you've not articulated it and you don't have it quite right in your head where you started. That's why we went through how to do a workflow and how to talk to people. But start with this idea. Now that you've gone through and you've engaged with some human beings, let's talk about where you can find other information across the federal government, particularly focusing on the Department of Defense, about how to learn. So the Congressional Budget Justification Book, I told you a few minutes ago that I want to give you some fundamental ideas that apply between the commercial world and the public sector, and I wanted to give you something tangible you can dive into. This document is where all the money is, period. Congress appropriates all the dollars, and they're all listed in these series of documents. Now, there's a couple of different kinds of money we use in the Department of Defense. We're going to talk about procurement and research, development, test, and evaluation today. Another common type of money is called operations and maintenance dollars. Each service has different codes and calls it a little different. Here's the difference and why these series of documents I'm introducing you to matter is because the way that we spend operations and maintenance dollars is we essentially say, when Congress appropriates the dollars, they say, hey, Army, here's $140 billion for operations and maintenance. Don't spend it all in one place. That's a gross oversimplification, but you're not going to find much more detail on how those dollars are spent. And do you really need to? Do you really need to know how much copier paper the 18th Airborne Corps is buying? I don't think it really is going to have much of an effect. And you'd tie people's hands if you did that. These types of dollars, what we call research, development, and acquisition dollars, the RDA budget. This is much more tightly controlled. These are all your weapon systems, all your IT systems. Everything that needs to be researched and procured falls into these categories. Everything you've heard called a program of record in acquisition sense is funded by RDA appropriations, and all those appropriations are listed in these books. RDA appropriations, research, development, acquisition, includes two broad types: research, development, test and evaluation, and procurement. From there, it just gets exponentially more complicated. But what I want you to understand is that, taking a step back, now that I've gone a bit into the weeds with you, each one of these books lists out not only the type of money a program of record has, but what they're authorized to spend it on. If you get money to go and do research on tanks, and you get direction to spend that money for research on airplanes, that's against the law. It's called misappropriation. And we're pretty strict about not having people do it. So how these dollars are appropriated is very important to you. It cuts both ways. Not only does it focus us on a project, it also ties our hands a bit. So if you have an idea for a new trailer design to go on a prime mover, you need to be able to go look in the procurement dollars and in the RDT&E dollars and see who is working on this problem. This is a place where you'll learn that. So I've just given you one example, and this is the defense-wide RDT&E budget. These books exist for each service. They're broken down by budget activity, and they're broken down by procurement type. When you open them up, you will see what the dollars are for and who is executing them. And now the step for you is to go contact those people and see who it is that works on, who's spending that money and what they're trying to do with it. What you'll likely find is that these people are going to be willing, they're generally willing to talk to other government service members because they're always looking for new people who are friends in court. And if they're telling you they're not working on your problem, that's not a bad answer for them either. They've got a good justification for doing why they're doing what they are doing. As long as you're not trying to convince them to stop what they're doing and start doing what you want to be done, then they're going to be pretty proactive in trying to work with you. My experience with most people in this community is that they genuinely want to solve problems. They're not there to just try and throw up roadblocks, but they work in a very complicated mess of a system that they have to navigate. And you just become one more unknown that they have to solve without an equation to solve it when you try and shoehorn what you're doing into what they're doing. So take this as an opportunity to do research and listen to what these people are doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about, and places where you should be able to get information, are the program executive offices. So these are entities that exist under the Secretariat in each service. And these are kind of the umbrella offices in which PMs live. So the way that you can use the different offices is that you can understand from the Congressional Budget Justification book what it is that each of these offices, where all the dollars are being spent by each of these offices. And then you can understand who in each of these program executive offices is executing those dollars so you can contact them. And what I tried to do with this, let me Google that, is to get you to take a look at one particular person in each PEO. So trying to hit that theme again of giving you the fundamentals and then give you something tangible to work on. Go find the Deputy Program Executive Officer. That person is either a GS-15 or an SES, and they're the person that does all the back-end stuff so that the PEO can lead. The PEO may be an SES or a general officer. Remember, all the money is in the PMs. When you go read that Congressional Budget Justification book, there are no dollars for PEOs. The headquarters doesn't have all the money. The money goes straight to the PMs. But the deputy PEO, those people across the board and every one of the services, those are the people who help glue everything together at the next level. So they are a one-stop shop where you can call and say, hey, I have this question about trailers. Let me call the Army PEO for Combat Service Support Systems and ask them what they're working on with this. My experience has been, again, every one of these people are professionals who want to help you solve problems. So just like you would have to do in the civilian world, there's some amount of cold calling you're going to have to do. Look, maybe you know a guy who knows a girl who knows a guy that can get you connected to some of these people, but you're going to have to reach out and talk to other human beings to understand what it is they can and cannot do for you. I'm trying to give you an avenue to understand which human beings to ask which questions so you can understand the fundamental thing that you have to answer. Who else is working on this problem? There's two other groups of people that you need to be able to research. This is more complicated and you're going to need some help figuring out who these people are. That's why I gave you the deputy PEO. The deputy PEO will know by name who you need to contact from these other two groups. And those are the requirements writers. As the first group, everything we just mentioned about programs of record exists because there is an approved requirements document. In very technical terms, that's called a capabilities development document. It sits under the Joint Capabilities Development and Integration System. That's interesting to know, but it's not the critical thing you need to know. You need to know What office is responsible for writing requirements for this new mythical trailer that we want to create for our prime mover? And your deputy PEO will know who that is and be able to put you in contact with them. The next thing you need to know is that who is doing what we call science and technology that happens before something gets to a PEO. So who's doing the research on that radical new trailer design that would allow them to carry twice as much in half the amount of space? Again, the deputy PEO is the person who will know the person that you need to talk to. So I tried to give you something tangible that exists in each of the services and a point of contact. I'm making some hate mail for some deputy PEOs when you guys start reaching out to them, but that's okay. That's life in the big leagues. These are, look, again, these are good people. These are people who want to solve problems. And when you come to them saying, hey, I'm trying to solve a problem, and you actually talk to them first, let me tell you why they appreciate that. Because what is pain for someone in this position is when you go to a general officer and you convince them that there's a real problem and you maybe haven't done all the research and you tell them nobody else is working on it and they believe you and they want to support you. And so they fire off an email or two and their staff fires off an email or 30 that end up in this same person's inbox. And so now instead of talking to you once, they got to answer 30 emails on the same question from people who have a lot of weight. So if you start with the program executive offices and work with them from there, that's your best bet for how to get the rest of the research done. So let's come back to that key point about why are you doing all this? You've told the boss, ma'am, this is the problem. And she's believed you. Now you've got to convince her that no one else is working on solving it, or maybe somebody is working on solving it and you want to partner with them, and that's the help you need from her. But you got to be able to do that research. And we're making a translation between the kind of research you do in the civilian world to say who else is working in this market, i.e. what's your competition, and what we're doing here on the government space is to say who's trying to solve this problem for our beneficiaries. All right, I showed this last time, and this is kind of the one overall slide we always talk about. What I did last time was I juxtapose cost, schedule, and performance, which is what this slide represents, from desirability, feasibility, and viability, which is what we talk about in the innovation space. And I'm trying to point out to you where these people fit. The deputy program executive officers, they're going to fit in that acquisition process. These are the acquisition officials who have the authority to oversee programs. The Joint Capabilities Integration Development System, those are your requirements writers. Programming, planning, budgeting, and execution system, that's where your CBJB, your Congressional Budget Justification book comes from. So we're focusing on that CBJB today because that's the first thing most people want to ask. Where's the money? How do I get? I already know the answer, right? I've already got the solution. I just need to go find the money for it and get it built. What I'm trying to show you is how you can do your research to find who actually has those appropriated dollars and how they're being spent right now. All right, so here's a piece that we want to talk about in terms of how you update and pivot from the problem. To quote General Jumper, former Chief of Staff of the Air Force, there's a 0% chance you've got this 100% right. You should have learned something in going through your process about understanding your problem statement, and you should have started that iteration that I'm trying to convey to you is critical here. This should do the same thing. You should learn something in doing this research. And if you don't accept going in that maybe you really don't have a problem or somebody else is already solving it, you're probably set up for failure. So what successful entrepreneurs do, we call them serial entrepreneurs, right? Because they fail a lot. Oftentimes it's because they stop a project before it gets too far because they realize all the elements that come together to form a successful business aren't there. You have to be ready to do the same thing. So what I'm challenging you to do is you should have come into this webinar series thinking about a problem you wanted to solve. Maybe it was something you were actively working on. Maybe it's just something in the back of your head. And as you thought about that problem statement, if you've gone out and engaged with the people you think it impacts, then you should have learned more about it. You could have learned that, man, you really are onto something and there's a whole universe of problems here. Or maybe you learned that you didn't quite have it right and you need to adjust a little bit. And you got to pivot. And you pivot based on facts, not on feelings. You pivot based on facts, not on projections, not on assumptions. You got to go out and actually gather the evidence. And this is what this research does for you. So if you think about what you're able to say now, you're able to say, this is the problem, this is who has it, this is the impact, and I can convince you of that, ma'am, because let me tell you this story. No kidding, there I was, talking to Sergeant Jones, and Sergeant Jones told me X, Y, or Z. Or your own lived experiences are valuable as well. Just build on top of your lived experiences with someone else's experiences. And now you're just given the facts. Looked in the CBJB. This is the amount of money that's allocated to the system. I talked to Mr. Jones, who's the deputy PEO at insert PEO here. He connected me with this person, that person, and the other person. So I talked to all those people, and this is what I found. Now you've got a compelling argument, and you've gotten there in less than 60 seconds. Boss, here's the problem. Let me give you a story about the problem. Now I'm going to throw some numbers at you, right? We're spending $1.78 billion in research, development, test, and evaluation in new vehicles, and 0 of those dollars are going to new trailer designs. Okay, so now I know somebody else is not working on this. So I want you to understand how these two building blocks come together. The first part is purely human interaction. This is about whether or not people perceive a problem, and a problem is something when they have a job to do and they have a pain that won't allow them to do it, and you're going to provide the pain reliever. This piece, this is just about facts and numbers. This isn't about how anyone feels. It's not about their opinion. It's not about some airy idea of mission accomplishment. The money's there or the money isn't there, and you'll be able to back it up with what you learn by talking to human beings. So once again, to foot stomp what one of the people that I follow in this whole entire area, Steve Blank, get out of the building. There are no answers where you're sitting right now. It's an echo chamber. You need to go out and talk to human beings who are stakeholders in this problem, and that's not always just the end user. Any system you want to employ, whether it's a combat system or a support system, has to be integrated by the entire staff. So if the operations officer who's writing the plans for what the unit is going to do doesn't understand how to employ that system, then the system doesn't get employed. In a class that I teach, the very first exercise we do is called things that exist to be inventoried. Because if you've ever served or you've ever been around an operational unit, you know there are mill vans and Connexes filled with billions of dollars of equipment that never see the light of day. They do exactly what they're supposed to do. They just do something that no one needed done. And so they don't get used. And that's what I want you to think about here. Don't just focus on the end user. That person's important, and your leaders want to hear about their stories and their pains and how you're going to solve them. But you got to work through the entire chain of stakeholders. That's why I gave you all those other people to talk to, from the deputy PEO to the requirements writer, to the people who are doing the science and technology to come up with the next generation of the thing. So hopefully you've been out gathering some facts. If you haven't, it's never too late. Go out and talk to people about what you need to do. And then this is a key point that I like to really emphasize over and over again. Stories. People relate to stories. When you can tell that leader, I was talking to Miss Jones. Miss Jones had this compelling story where this happened to her, and this was the impact of the problem for her. This is what this problem caused for her, because we can relate to that. Stories plus numbers make a memorable pitch. I gave the example last time, 22. I remember 22 is the number of veterans we lose every day to suicide. That number is etched in my brain because I can relate to it quickly. Stories and numbers equals a memorable pitch. It's unlikely that someone's going to remember the awesome picture you had on your slide. They are almost definitely not going to remember the volume of words you put on your slide. They're going to remember your story. They're going to remember the numbers, and they're going to remember your enthusiasm. They're going to remember how you conveyed it. And once you own those two things, when you own those facts, when they're a part of how you truly think about and understand the problem, and you own those stories, and you have context around the problem, because you don't have the same story 17 times, you have stories from all these different stakeholders about this problem. Now you're not only able to convey what the challenge is and how you want to solve it, you're able to talk about it in context when questions come up. Okay, that is it for me. That's all I'm going to talk about today. With some luck, I'll stop sharing my screen. And then we will turn it on for Q&A. While I'm starting the Q&A, my teammate Anthony is going to put a few links in the chat. So the first one is, if you are interested in more no-cost opportunities to get involved with innovation, then we have a program called Hacking for Defense. 60 universities around the world work on problems submitted by people just like you, so that they can get after what we really want to do is get grad students involved in solving DoD problems. Problem sponsors submit the problem and engage directly with the grad students. So not only do you potentially get a solution to your problem, but you get 15 lessons at an R1 university of exactly the same kind of stuff I'm talking about. A lot more depth, a lot more breadth, and maybe better instructors. So you'll get that opportunity if you want to engage in that as you go forward. I will tell you, over the years, and Anthony can correct me if I don't have this right, I think we've had 55 startups spin out of this class. They took the problem they were given and then they formed their own company. And now they're out there doing the Series A, Series B, Series C thing to form a company. I'm seeing Anthony nodding, so I
Yeah, we're
probably
actually we're up to 59. So
59. Wow, keeps growing. Hey, maybe yours is one of the next one. So another link that I'll ask Anthony to drop in there is a book that one of our colleagues wrote. It's about innovation, creating innovation navigators. So that's something you can choose to check out. I will, in theory, put my email address in here. So if there are other questions you have for me, send them. And if you want to talk about some of the other classes that I teach, then we can talk about that. So